Hello and welcome to the Aromatic Mystery School. I'm Elizabeth Ashley, the Secret Healer, and I am really excited today to talk to my excellent friend Helen Nagle Smith about her new book. And I wanted to tell you about it before anybody else got to tell you about the stuff because it's so good. It's going to be back to front on the screen, but Aromatherapy and Trauma by Helen Nagle Smith comes out today, if I've done my job right, March the 20th. Hell, is that right? 21st, March the 21st. And I thought I'm going to grab her and get her on to tell her about it. So congratulations, Helen.
Oh, thank you, Liz, for having me. Yeah, it feels like a great achievement. It's finally come to being after all that time. You know what it's like, you write a book and then it goes to the publishers and you wait and you go through all the processes. So it's quite a long period of time before it sort of comes to light for everybody else, really.
I don't think people outside of publishing probably appreciate how hard it is from that moment of I finished writing to getting it into people's hands. So you've done a great job, and you've done an amazing job on this book. So before I get you to talk about it, I want to read some of the things that people have said about it. So Jonathan Benvenides, who is a psychologist and a tremendous ambassador for end of life care, has written, Helen Nagle Smith's book offers a blend of science, aromatherapy practices, and empathetic storytelling, guiding readers towards understanding trauma as a spectrum, invaluable for anyone seeking to navigate personal healing or support others using scent. Elizabeth Guthrie has put a masterpiece that will support practitioners and laypersons alike. Kathy Skipper and Florian Birkmeyer said, for anyone interested in working with aromas to contribute to healing trauma, this is an important book. I saved the best till last, obviously. My endorsement, after reading it at length when it was first written, immaculately researched and written, in my opinion, this book should be compulsory reading for every practicing aromatherapist. And I genuinely believe that, Hell, because I feel like, actually, I'll give you an insult to begin with. I didn't learn that much about essential oils, to be honest. There wasn't much in there I didn't know. But what I learned about was the spectrum and so many useful pieces of information about dealing with people with trauma. And I feel like I had a whole range of education that would probably have taken like a week-long intensive course to learn. So thank you for that. And I wanted to start by asking you, what gives you the right to write a book like that? where's your background in trauma? So tell people about that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because a lot of people, and thank you for reading out, the endorsements and things. That's really kind, Liz. It's always very humbling when other people talk about your own work. And it's difficult because most of us don't like sort of sitting center stage. We just, particularly if we write, we like to sort of quite often sit in the background and just, it's a very solitary process, isn't it? But it's really also really lovely when people talk about your work as well. I think what really brought about the book was really my background. I started out, I did a sociology degree, and I started out working as a volunteer for charities in my late teens, including listening services, and then going out into the voluntary sector in a paid capacity when I left university. So I went into information and counselling services. So it was very much from a very early age, I was working with groups of people. I was working with individuals who were experiencing a wide range of different traumas. And I think it's really important for us to say that trauma is a human experience, and very often sometimes we think about it, it's very tempting to think about it's not something that affects people we know or ourselves or wider society. It's perhaps isolated to certain groups, or to somebody living in a war-torn country, or somebody who's working in the services, for example. And we know that's not the case. Trauma's a really human experience that happens to a lot of people. And so what I was seeing very early on in my career was I was working with a lot of young women, particularly under the age of about 25, who had experienced domestic violence, who were having unwanted pregnancies, sometimes miscarriages, young women who'd experienced, and young men who were experiencing a lot of bullying, harassment, maybe because of things like their sexual identity. So a lot of violence and things as well in people's lives. So it became apparent very early on in my adult life, if you like, that understanding of how trauma really impacted the mind and the body. And I was seeing that through a work lens from very early on. But I then moved to working with the national charities, so people were, you know, I was experiencing, seeing people experience trauma in a different way through different things. And then I noticed when I moved into and I changed career in my 30s, and I moved into being a clinical aromatherapist, and I've done that for nearly 20 years now, that trauma is still very present in the lives of many people who come to see me. And talking to other aromatherapists, I was really aware of this as well. So sometimes our clients don't use the word trauma attached to their experience. That's not necessarily in their vocab, but they're coming to you very often at a time where they're feeling very vulnerable, perhaps not feeling very safe, feeling quite isolated perhaps, and often sometimes there's a trauma history for them, and that doesn't always come out straight away in the first consultation. Quite often you're not aware of that. You know, we ask about certain things. I ask about things like triggers, mental health diagnoses, PTSD, those kinds of things. But very often what I was realizing was very often I would be seeing somebody for weeks or months or years even, and then they would start to disclose and certain things that had happened earlier on in their life. But through those experiences in both careers, I really had a sense of how impactful trauma is for the mind, for the body, and really for the soul as well, how much it has that impact. And I think we're very good at in society at kind of glossing over some of the difficult stuff. So I really wanted to write a book with that background in mind, where I could pull in some experiences perhaps that I had, but actually really do the research and really look to see actually how we could link together aroma and our sense of olfaction and trauma a little bit more closely, and kind of continue those conversations. Because I was noticing we were having those within the aromatic community, we've been having conversations about trauma, but I think we need to continue those conversations as well. So that was a kind of the background to the book. And when I was researching my last book, I kept realizing that I kept wanting to write about books, to write about essential oils that were indicated for trauma. And I was thinking, well, this is interesting, isn't it? And at the time, of course, I was writing the previous book during a number of lockdowns. So I was writing on the back of kind of COVID-19, and you know, that was a massive global trauma in so many different ways. So that was the background to it, really, and that's why I felt the need to write it, I guess.
Absolutely, and I can't stress it's a really wonderful book. And one of the things that I found most useful was a section you'd written about the 4 R's of trauma. And I'd never really thought about appraising somebody in that way when they came to me. So I wondered if you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think it's really important. There's a whole section on working in a trauma-informed way, which I think is really important for anybody doing that face-to-face work, or anybody offering a service to somebody else. And really the 4 R's of trauma are around recognizing trauma. So understanding, realizing the extent of it, and then recognizing it as well. And then also responding to that for the person, so acknowledging it and responding in a way that's appropriate as well. So for example, if somebody discloses something, it's really easy for people to come out with platitudes because they don't know what to say, so they'll want to say something. So if somebody's just disclosed something really difficult in their past, then somebody turning around and going, yeah, but you've got a great life now, haven't you, isn't helpful. It doesn't help somebody feel heard. So I look at very practical examples around the 4 R's. And then the final R obviously is around resisting re-traumatizing, because sometimes with the best will in the world, when people don't understand people's histories, we can accidentally re-traumatize somebody. So I give an example in my book, for example, of always explaining what you're going to do. So what noises people might hear in your space, for example. So for example, if there's somebody else in the building, it's useful for that person who's going to be, you know, having an aromatherapy massage, for example, to know that there are other people in the building. So if you hear movement, or if you hear some steps in the corridor, that's okay. And explaining that beforehand so that we don't get these sudden incidences that might potentially be re-traumatizing for people. Simple things like saying, you know, if somebody's going to, you need somebody to move their feet, rather than picking up their feet without asking, just saying, could you lift your feet for me, or I can move them for you and we'll just pop a bolster underneath. It's simple things like that that are actually really important, because sometimes there are incidences where, you know, let's say, for example, if somebody's had medical intervention, they've already experienced trauma potentially through that experience. And I've had clients where that's happened before. So it's really important for them not to yank their feet or move their feet, you know, if somebody's had a really bad experience in that way, because potentially it could be re-traumatizing for them. So really, those 4 R's are about really expanding our knowledge and our awareness in how we meet people where they're at.
Yeah, and the other thing that I really found interesting, I am constantly reminded of how very white privileged I am, and how many times I need to be slapped about it, to be honest. And one of the sections that I thought was really fascinating was how you talked about how non-white communities were disproportionately affected by trauma. I wondered if you'd like to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think this is part of the understanding around recognizing trauma in particular, is understanding that it's different for different communities. And it's really difficult. I mean, let's say, for example, let's look at medicalized trauma. Let's look at the institution of medicine. Now, there's layers and layers of history there about the way certain professions have unfortunately continued to perpetuate trauma and make assumptions based on the colour, for example, of somebody's skin. So while I was researching the book, I was absolutely horrified to see that quite a recent piece of research, we're talking 2020s here, we're not talking 20, 30, 60 years ago, we're talking really recent, in America, where doctors, a large proportion of doctors thought that people who had black skin had less pain levels and less nerves. You know, the nerve endings weren't as sensitive. And I think that's really frightening. It just goes to show how a service provision can be really stacked against somebody based on these assumptions and racial prejudices, really. So I think it's really important that we understand that and are aware of that. And actually, I know we're here to talk about my book, but this is a really important book that I think everyone should read. This really informed a lot of the chapters. This is a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's by Resmaa Menakem. And he points out really beautifully, in a number of different ways, actually how we need to understand our unconscious bias and how we need to think about that within the institutions that we have in society, as well as individually as well. But yeah, it's very thought-provoking, I think, when you realize those statistics or come across that research and you realize that there's massive chasms of difference there, where people are disproportionately being affected by trauma based on something like the colour of their skin.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that you brought the book up, because I did go and actually take your recommendation when I first started reading your work, and I have found it a really useful book.
Yeah.
You don't realise what different worlds people live in to yourself until you read something like that from a different perspective. I think you're right to really recommend it.
Yeah.
I really liked the section in your book where you had been talking about almost like case studies that people had done. And my favourite was a lady called, if I get her name right, I hope, Natasha Curler. Have I said her name
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was working with refugees.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful example, isn't it? What did you like about it? What caught your attention with that?
I think that I just thought, well, how brave, to be
Mm.
honest. You know, I'm aware that I sit in an office all day, every day, and while I am probably the first person that any of my friends come to if they feel upset, it's not to say that I'm not an approachable person. To go and find those communities and actively engage with them day in, day out, I thought extremely brave. But then also she did talk about how exhausted she got, how she had to learn to be able to switch it off. And I thought, for somebody who operates quite empathically like myself, that would have been why I would have avoided that work.
Mm-hmm.
And to see somebody say, well, actually, yeah, I do go through that, but I found ways to manage that, I found that really helpful.
Yeah, I think she words things beautifully, and one of the things that I really noticed about the book, so I'm just turning to pick it up because there's a nice little bit I can read. She talks about, as you say, she talks about her experience going into refugee work, and she travels from, she lives in Germany, she travels from Germany to different places. And she talks about the familiarity of a smell, of an aroma for people, and what that can do, you know, one single drop of lemon. So there's this lovely quote where she says, this work is only one drop in the ocean, but one drop of lemon for the children gives 1,000 smiles. And I thought it was beautiful because she would describe how she went into a refugee camp thinking, I need to take things to manage, you know, things like coughs and colds, and, you know, thinking about that, but then actually going in and going, actually what people are really dealing with is trauma here, and realizing that the simplicity of what she could offer was so much more than she'd anticipated. But like you say, also understanding, she includes we include a couple of formulas that she created, and one of them was a formula of an oil that she left, an oil blend that she left behind for people who were continuing to do the work after she left, which I think she calls saving oil, which I thought was beautiful because, like you say, it's that recognition, that understanding that she was going in for a very short period of time and then coming back out again. But actually, the people who were living there were continuing to experience that trauma in that setting. And I think she also writes beautifully. She says, you know, these people had come to this country and they were aware as refugees that they weren't wanted in any other country. So it's very emotive, I think, reading the experiences in the case studies. But I felt like they were really important because it's all very well to do the research and, you know, a huge amount of research on our olfactory system, a huge amount of research around trauma and what that does to the mind and the body went into it. But then it was a case of bringing it together and peppering it with my own examples wasn't enough. I felt like I needed to, because I'm working in particular settings, you know, I don't have this vast chasm of experience, whereas by talking to about 20 other aromatherapists, and there's 15 case studies in here, they could bring together different examples of that, and it's shining a light on what they're doing elsewhere, which is really important because we're working together as an aromatic community, understanding that essential oils, hydrolats, CO2 extracts can have a massive impact for people. They can be a brilliant support and coping tool. So actually, we as aromatherapists, we understand that, because we understand how they work and how important our sense of smell is. But it was really important just to give some life to that. And so I've talked about it, it's kind of being the heartbeat of the book almost, because I think it brings it to life. And I think everybody will read that chapter and find 2 or 3 those case studies in particular will resonate with them in some way, will touch them in some way, for sure.
What I also saw in that section was, you can spend ages and ages and ages, as you say, researching everything there is to know about essential oils for trauma, but your term actually meeting somebody where they're at and working out, well, what's the most important thing to them.
Yeah.
Natasha's giving lemon, if I remember rightly, it was the children, right? The children really liked the lemon because it made them feel cheerful. Now, you wouldn't have ever thought that that's what you were going to that wouldn't have been your objective, but that was by far the most important thing that they wanted to achieve. And I thought that was really a poignant thing to point out.
Absolutely. And what really resonated was this sort of, you know, there was a language barrier there, you know, but actually you can tell straight away if somebody likes an aroma or not. You can gauge that instant automatic reaction, because our reaction is so visceral, you know, and so quick and so instant that, yes, if it reminds you of something familiar. And again, we saw that with other examples in the book that we're given. You know, Denise Cusack talks about using rose with refugee communities. Nicole talks about that as well, you know, the importance of rose, hydrolat in Lebanon and so on. So I think it's really interesting how sometimes that smell, that aroma, has a really familiar sense of attachment and cultural importance to us. But then also we can as aromatherapists, we can create aromas. So it was really important to me to put in a chapter about aromatherapy, because for people like you, Liz, who've been, you know, working as an aromatherapist for like 30 years and you've written 20 plus books on aromatherapy, yeah, there's probably not much more you don't know. You know, it's all there, isn't it, for you? But I think for people who are coming at this, who perhaps a student aromatherapist or somebody who's a complementary therapist, but they don't know much about aromatherapy, or an individual who's just looking for some support on their own journey with working with their own trauma, then having that section on essential oils is really important. And it's not to say that I've picked, you know, 20 plus essential oils and I've written about those. It doesn't have to be those 20. They're just there as an example or as a starting point. So if something resonates with somebody, they can go, okay, well, I remember I like the smell of orange, so there's an orange essential oil. Okay, I'm going to go get that. But actually, it's finding what's right for that person and what hits the mark for them. And sometimes we're creating a completely new blend, a synergy, that then is associated with a really positive feeling. You know, so perhaps somebody comes to see an aromatherapist for an aromatherapy massage, and they associate that with, you know, being looked after, having some sense of soothing and calm for their nervous system, and that's a positive thing. And they can then take that blend away, so they can refer back to that blend and it will remind them of that time. And that's really important as well. So just finding where somebody's at is, I think, crucial to thinking about how we respond to people.
For sure. I want to pick up another couple of sections. I don't want you to talk about them. I just want to say what I think is important that people go and read. So the first is, I knew nothing about polyvagal theory with regard to the nervous system and trauma. Excellent physiology all laid out for me. I also have written something else down and I've forgotten what I was going to say. Don't know, but there's oh yes, I know, specifically about becoming a trauma-informed therapist, and the questions to be able to ask somebody to establish, are they a trauma-informed therapist, I thought was so useful. So it really is a marvellous book, Hel. It really is, and I do think that it should be on everybody's reading list, given that the nature of essential oils is that it tickles memory. That's what it does. You are always going to be walking a dangerous line, I think, of not knowing what landmines you might explode. And so, yeah, I felt this was an excellent preparation and help for when that happens to me. So thank you for everything that you've written.
Oh, thank you. It's and thank you for your support. I mean, it's a really important subject, and I think we've got a long way to go as a society. And I think we don't talk about aroma and our sense of olfaction, our sense of smell. We don't talk about that much in the world of traumatology. So if you go to a trauma conference, you can have 3 days where nobody even mentions the sense of smell. And then in the aromatic world, we really understand the importance of the sense of smell. But are we necessarily asking the right questions on our consultation forms? Do we know how to react if somebody has a reaction to something when we're working with them? So I think it's things like that I really wanted to just bring it all together and just create further conversation and further dialogue. So it's important that I think as a society we come closer to being more open and responsive to the impact of trauma for people. We're not there yet, but we're getting there slowly.
Your book definitely helps. So can you give a quick plug, publisher, where we can find it, all of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's published by Singing Dragon, and it is available on the Singing Dragon website. It's also available on Amazon. It's also available on KDP for anybody that likes to read electronically, wants to download it to their Kindle or anything like that. And then it's also available from a number of major online book retailers. So in the UK, for example, Waterstones, you can order it from Waterstones' website. You can order it from Barnes and Noble in the US. You can order it from Blackwell's, for example. So it's available in lots of different places, really. And people can go to my website as well, of course, and I've got links there for people to follow as well.
Excellent. Helen, many congratulations and thank you.
Oh, thank you.